Welcome everyone to Cowboy Pomona's 17th annual Cybersecurity and Awareness Fair. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. I hope you have enjoyed your time at our event thus so far. We would like to thank our sponsors for supporting this event, and I would like to give a warm welcome and introduce Ross, Darren, and Nick, who will be presenting on the topic of becoming a cybersecurity professional. As we go through this presentation, please feel free to post any questions in the chat session. All questions will be answered during the Q&A portion at the very end. Thank you.
Great, Tyler, thank you so much for your intro and for allowing us to participate. And for those of us that have joined us today, we appreciate you and your interest. Today we're going to talk a bit about how, at least from our perspective, folks can get into the cybersecurity world. And we're going to kick that off a little bit with our journey. So Ross and I will talk a bit about how we got here. And from our perspective, some backgrounds that we have seen help get entry-level folks into the cybersecurity discipline. And we'll kind of dovetail into a discussion about career paths that enable a cybersecurity job and career. And one thing to sort of please remember about that is there's no checklist to do this. There's no one way to get into this career, and we're going to have some examples of that. And finally, we're going to talk a bit about what we look for as hiring managers and practitioners, and we look to scale our teams or hire new folks. Hopefully that agenda is helpful. And we're going to kick it off with Ross. Ross, would you tell us a bit about your journey, how you got into the cybersecurity world, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, so jumping right off into non-linear journeys. My background is actually international relations, believe it or not. That's what I got my master's degree in a long time ago. And I actually backed into cybersecurity via policy work. I spent a good chunk of time in the DC area working at think tanks, looking at traditional military issues between China and the United States. And at the time, cyber was starting to become an issue. Nobody really understood it that well. There wasn't a lot of literature on it. And so I kind of just jumped into it because I'd done a lot of programming in high school. I wasn't afraid of the technology. But at the end of the day, the approach that I was always taking at that time was cyber's a tool, right? It's a means to exert influence. It's a means to have an effect on your end target. It has to fit the pattern and the way your adversary thinks about things in general. And so by taking that lens on it, I ended up deep diving into kind of how China was using cyber, how the United States might be able to approach them to get them to change their behavior in the very early days. So it was prior to 2010. And through that work, I actually ended up finding myself in the USIC looking at cyber things. So I had a crash course in the hands-on technical aspect of how do you chase adversaries around networks? How do you reverse malware? How do you look at what's going on a system, getting kind of those incident response type skills. And from there, I kind of popped back up to the policy level, doing a lot of, for those of you that are familiar with VIC, the term's all source intelligence. So it's looking at all of the data that's available to the intelligence community and trying to make sense out of it and help policymakers make better decisions to combat the national security threats. After that, I jumped out of the government and went into vendor land for a while, helping build intelligence programs for some of the cybersecurity vendors in the space to help them inform clients better. And I think that has kind of been my North Star throughout my entire career is I chase hard problems and I'm always trying to help people make better decisions. And cyber is one of those unique places where we have a lot of data and really poor analytics, which means that there's a lot of fertile ground to chase hard problems and make things better. And throughout that entire time, I have sharpened my technical skills, but I've really focused on that intelligence and analysis part. And I think a recurring touch point that you'll hear me come back to throughout this entire conversation is analysis is key, especially in a place that is as data rich as cybersecurity. And that's one of those things that is an intangible that really puts you apart from some of your peers, above and beyond some of the other things that you can tick the box on. And so with that relatively short introduction, I'll hand it over to Darren, because I know he has an equally interesting gateway into cyber.
Yeah, my journey into cybersecurity was actually it wasn't a sort of goal of mine when I started. I started in the Air Force as a calibration and repair technician in a shop that repaired electronic equipment. And as computers became more prevalent, I got better at working with and understanding networking and the like. And eventually was recruited into the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. It's kind of like the NCIS, and has a similar mission as the FBI with counterintelligence and criminal investigations. And even then, I did more of the surveillance aspect, where we were either countering nation states, bugs and the like, or tracking criminals through whether it's long-range surveillance or other technical means. And as I was doing that, computers were just interesting more and more, and I started moonlighting at our computer crime section, and eventually they recruited me over to do computer crime investigations. And I spent 16 years going after intelligence services and criminals through and in cyberspace. That culminated in 2018. Did various leadership jobs and related to cybersecurity, and went over to the commercial space, where we built a cybersecurity practice that did incident response investigations, threat intel, and the like. And I moved here, where I am now, last June, to do the same, to build a new practice in and around that. And I think both Ross and I are great examples, and you'll hear a little bit from Nick later, of evolving into cybersecurity through a journey, not necessarily as a focus. And I think that's an important lesson for folks that are getting into cybersecurity, quite frankly. And that kind of segues into, all right, what are the backgrounds that enable a cybersecurity career, and where do successful candidates, sort of come from, foundationally? And we've got some thoughts in and around that, and you'll see. We'll go back over to Ross for his thoughts, and then he'll kick it back over to me. But Ross, so as far as backgrounds that might help an entry-level candidate, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll go back to that intangible that I mentioned a second ago. Analysis and inquisitiveness. I find that the best cyber analysts, whether you're doing cyber threat intelligence, incident response investigations, have a natural inquisitiveness that allows them to pick at things. And over time, they develop a good gut instinct as a result of knowing which rabbit hole is worth going down. And so what I look for, kind of from a background perspective, it's people who, yes, have technical skills, because that's going to automatically make you more useful to your employer if you understand how Wireshark operates, if you understand how to pull data out of an EDR tool, but also have demonstrated that they think a little outside the box, that they've taken a couple classes outside of the cybersecurity arena, that they're not just going down kind of that straight path. Because I'm very concerned when I see box checkers and people who only focus on one thing and don't show that they're branching out and providing additional interest and value. And so the backgrounds that I'm looking for tend to be people who dabble in poli-sci a little bit, history, those types of things, to get context around the things that they're looking at, that are doing extracurricular activities such as hack the box, hacking tournaments, those types of things. And honestly, and this is probably a little bit of a change up, I actually look for schools that don't necessarily have the strongest reputation, only because I've found that a lot of people who go through some of those programs tend to be very structured in their approach, and that creates brittleness. And so that flexibility is something else that I'm really looking for, and anything in your background that kind of demonstrates that will clear kind of that initial sniff test for me when I'm looking at candidates. Because one thing that is constant in cyber is change, right? What we knew 2 years ago is going to be drastically different than what we're looking at today, not just because the technology itself is changing, but also because the way the threat actors are interacting is changing. Every action we take as defenders impacts how the threat actor is going to come at the system next time. And so if you get stuck in patterns, in things that worked 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, you're going to miss stuff going forward. And it's really hard to be that flexible as a professional. And the people who really thrive in this industry demonstrate their willingness to kind of go that extra mile, are somewhat obsessed with what's going on. And they're the ones that really excel. And you can spot them very early just based off of kind of how they approach the work. I know that was a bit of a ramble. Maybe Darren could put us back on track.
Well, and of course, agree with all those sentiments from a background perspective. You know, cyber, and the audience probably hear it ad nauseum, but it's evolved, you know, just so quickly over the years. If you would have asked me 10 years ago what a good foundation or background probably would have involved military, self-teaching, just basic hobbyist interests sometimes were great backgrounds. But now, as this event demonstrates, that academia has really stepped up and begun to produce a workforce that does have a very good foundation. And as far as, you know, getting into the cybersecurity discipline, there's nothing really better than experience. And a lot of times what we look for when we're looking at good candidates, whether it's in my previous life as a federal agent hiring new talent, or here in the commercial world, is a foundation of exposure, a demonstration of the ability to understand concepts, and an initiative to either innovate, you know, as a person, or understand where the environment was moving towards in that innovation. There's a number of entry-level jobs and positions that can be helpful getting into cybersecurity, and generally administrating computers, getting an entry-level job, working with an entity where you're keeping computers running, accounts going, working through the maintenance of Active Directory and the like, understanding and doing basic administrative work in and around networks and firewalls are often a really good foundation to then evolve into cybersecurity discipline. Web applications, really anywhere, and I said it in the question and answer, but anywhere that gives you exposure to our biggest sort of cybersecurity threats and where those threat actors are exploiting entities, that foundation in and around those core technologies or applications can be helpful. And I say that because we, in my previous role, or even in this one, we've had some great cybersecurity practitioners evolve from database administrators. We, in my previous role with the Air Force, one of our best cyber threat pursuit agents started out as a database administrator, and he dabbled in firewall maintenance and security. And he just also, though, evolved his personal portfolio through Hack the Box, as Ross mentioned, and really knew what threat actors were doing. And he came to us just ready to go and turned out to be one of our best agents. And in my previous commercial world, we hired a young lady from a East Coast college that was doing very well in their hacking competitions here on the East Coast. And she was an amazing coder and reverse engineer. And we actually couldn't hire her fast enough. She was so good. And she actually brought a couple of her peers, some of the better folks on the team, and just turned out to be some of the sharpest. That whole team was some of the best entry-level talent I had ever seen. And so there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's really not one way to get into cybersecurity, but there's some great ways to do that. And so, Ross, I'm going to transition into career paths that actually culminate in a cybersecurity position. And as Ross and I both demonstrated, the U.S. intelligence community, the USIC is one way to do that. Law enforcement is another. But my wife is also in the cybersecurity discipline, and she started out at Carnegie Mellon as a theater and arts management degree holder. So she worked in theater for a number of years and evolved into doing computers and cybersecurity through that. So there's a number of different paths you can take. One of our better computer crime investigators was actually a loss prevention investigator out of SeaWorld down in San Diego. He just happened to be really good at detecting fraud, and some of that was occurring in and around computers. And he developed a knack for understanding counterfeit passes and the like, and eventually he rotated into law enforcement. And just as sort of a segue into that thought process, I did a conference last week where they had it was an hour-long session about women in cyberspace, and they went through the various ways for which the women that were participating in the conference got into cybersecurity. And it was there was just no one path. And I think if we can pass anything on, it would be that there's not really a checklist for this. But Roth, from a career path perspective, what have you seen work? And I think you had a really good example of a nonlinear, including yourself.
Yeah, I do want to foot stomp one thing that you said earlier on, though. You got to know the rules to break the rules. And that goes for English grammar, but it also goes for how you hack a system, right? Some of those IT admin positions, people who love to look at kind of Windows system internals and understand operating systems at the core level, they turn out to be some of the best investigators because they understand the tricks, the techniques, the tactics that can be used. And also when you're looking at it from kind of the SOC analyst position, if you know what an Active Directory log is supposed to look like, something that is off starts popping out at you almost instinctually. And so having that baseline of understanding what good is supposed to look like, what stupid user activity looks like, as opposed to intentional malicious activity, because you've seen stupid user every day of your life in your past career, that really makes you efficient when you're doing investigations, incident response, SOC. So I'd recommend for those of you that are interested in kind of those more technical focused jobs, know the internals, know what the systems are supposed to be doing, know what good looks like, and pay attention to that in addition to the malicious activity. Because if you know what baseline is supposed to look like, if you know what good's supposed to look like, the bad sticks out a whole lot easier. And I think, because Darren's covered a lot of the nonlinear, I'll dive a bit more into the linear as well. Focus on those IT skills and also identify your goals, right? There's a lot of different cybersecurity jobs out there. There's CTI, which is kind of my baby and where I live. There's investigations that I kind of dabble in as well. There's instant response, there's SOX jobs, there's reversing malware. There's so many places that you can specialize. Know where you kind of have a natural interest or where you want to at least explore more, and start focusing on the skill sets that help you get there. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of gatekeeping in cybersecurity. I won't deny that, but there's also more often than not a lot of self-taught professionals. And so if you can show that you've exhibited interest, if you can show that you have the basics, there's also an overwhelming urge in the community to do mentorship and help bring on along people who show that they're self-started. For kind of that more linear example, I'd say getting into cybersecurity programs is a great start. Getting some of those certs like Sec Plus, if you can get a discount on them or can afford them, some of the SANS certifications go a long way in the industry as well, as a way to get past HR. But then start specializing, start finding the places that you really want to explore and thrive in, and just start doing extracurricular self-starting. If it's OSINT, do some trace lab exercises. They're a great nonprofit that tracks down trafficked people. It's a great way to get OSINT experience. They do capture the flag exercise all the time, and you do good along the way. There's Hack the Box for some of more red teaming pen testing. And so there's a bunch of different ways that you can kind of linearly stack those technical skills in a way that builds a very compelling case and resume.
Totally agree. I can't foot stomp the idea that, and Ross, you went through some of those yes, talent builders, Hack the Box or others that actually create a candidate that's maybe a little bit more attractive than the run-of-the-mill. Hey, I went through college, I graduated this course. You know, we often speak to really good candidates that aren't differentiating themselves. And Ross made a good point that there's, if you decide where you want to specialize, or if you find yourself that you have a knack for a particular area within this discipline, own that and innovate in that and demonstrate some passion in and around that. And I'll give you one example before we go in the question and answer arena. But we, in my previous role, we were looking for a talented investigator that understood how to pursue and correlate and attribute actors in and around social media. And as we went through the candidate list, this one gentleman really stood out. He had, not only the typical certs, but he had just graduated college, and one of the things he was doing was working for a nonprofit that pursued human traffickers in cyberspace. So the identifying human traffickers, whether it's in Facebook or other social media platform, and then creating a package of sort of evidence package and handing that off to a task force that law enforcement had stood up to understand human trafficking better. And so he was doing that on his own time, and he was doing it because he was passionate about, one, the issue, but two, about how to ferret out these human traffickers in cyberspace. And we can hire that person fast enough. And so I would just recommend that whatever your sort of specialization is of choice, own it, do well in it, innovate in it, and just rise above your peers in some form or fashion, because there is plenty of your peers who are doing something like that. And Nick's actually a good example of a practitioner in cyber that wasn't necessarily doing cybersecurity work, but he did a number of things, both as a professional as well as outside of his normal work, that demonstrated he could and was good at pursuing threat actor activity and understanding it and investigating it and reporting it. So with that, I'll actually hand it over to Nick. Nick, do we have any questions that,
Yeah, we have a couple good.
great.
Nick, you muted yourself.
There we go. Sorry, guys. Yeah, we have a couple questions here. One that I always love and a lot of people ask, and I'm sure Ross is going to have a great answer to this, is should you pursue a master's degree in IT after working for 4 years and being in the field to get into cybersecurity?
I will give my jaded answer, and maybe Darren can be a little more optimistic. As a holder of 2 master's degrees, they're not worth it unless they're being pursued for a very specific reason. And I say that because there are a lot of jobs that require master's degrees, especially in the humanities, which that's what I got mine in. That's the career that I thought I was going to be pursuing. From a technical perspective, masters and PhDs are more about, I think, self-fulfillment than career gatekeeping. Once you get into your first role, once you start climbing the corporate ladder, some people will point to like the CISSP as a very good cert to get to make you eligible for kind of CISO type roles, those types of things. I can't think of the last job position specifically in cybersecurity that had a master's degree as a requirement. And so if you really want to do that extended study, if you really like education, if you have a specific topic that you want to deep dive and research on, by all means, keep going to school, keep getting those degrees, keep doing that work because it's fulfilling and it's deepening your knowledge. But it's by no means necessary in this field to have a master's or a PhD to get to the types of positions that are kind of at the top of the pyramid.
I agree. We're in cybersecurity, especially experience and relevance, demonstrating that you have the skills to do this outweighs degrees. I have a master's degree as well. It didn't help me get here at all, actually. One of the cybersecurity disciplines that you don't hear about much is the legal channel. There's a lot of lawyers that also understand cybersecurity, work in this field for insurance companies and the like. And if I was going to do it again, I would probably angle towards that if I was going to spend more time in the academic world in working through the laws, the laws, and that legal discipline. If you look at what's happening with Facebook, if you look at what's happening with GDPR, really all the things that are shaping cyber today, as well as security, are all wrapped up into expectations in and around privacy and laws. And and then you match that up with cybersecurity, and it's a very sort of rewarding path, and there's a lot of demand for it. So I don't know if I would get a master's in IT. I might suggest that you spend that time maybe working towards a law degree, but that's just me. Anything else, Nick, that might be helpful? I think, Taylor, we got a couple minutes left, so maybe one more question.
Yes, let me see. We have a quick one that can be a rabbit hole, but I think it is a good question. What does digital forensics entail?
Go ahead, Ross.
Digital forensics generally implies doing analysis of artifacts on a machine. So
for a legal outcome, generally, digital media forensics is generally,
and that's why you generally see the abbreviation DFIR, because you do digital forensics in support of investigation and incident response, unless you're doing litigation support. So there is an entire subfield of this that is pure digital forensics, where you're capturing images off of disk, you're forensically retaining email, cell phone images, those types of things in support of litigation to show that certain data was resident on a device at a given time. In the more kind of traditional cybersecurity context, you're doing digital forensics in support of an investigation and incident response matter. And so it is very kind of I'd say some of the most technical work you can do in an investigation around grabbing what's going on in active memory, dumping an image of a disk, making sure that you've preserved as much as you can before you have to turn off the machine to prevent more harm from happening. So it's a way to preserve data, to do additional analysis on it, and also allowing you to do remediative actions in the middle of an investigation. Darren, did I miss anything on that?
No, and and I'll say one thing and let Taylor take over, but it's a term of art, I think, that's evolved. Forensics in general terms, if you think about that, it's usually a process that like law enforcement or some other entity does to really get to the who, what, when, where, why, what. It's a similar sort of methodology in cybersecurity, where you're using advanced tactics or techniques or tools to really understand what happened in an incident. And so with that, Taylor, I think we went 1 minute over.
That is okay. But thank you so much, Ross, Darren, and Nick, for being our guest speakers today. The talk was very insightful. I want to thank everyone for attending, and we hope you all learned a lot from this session. If you do have any other questions, please reach out to us. We will be happy to answer. Please don't forget to check our water bottle and laptop sticker contest, as we're giving away no starch press $20 ebook vouchers. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.